Romans chapter 8, verses 14 through 17. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are children of God. For you did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received a spirit of adoption. When we cry, Abba, Father, it is that very Spirit bearing witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if our children, then heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ, if, in fact, we suffer with him, so that we may also be glorified with him. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. And thank you, Allie. So today is Pentecost. It is a very, very special day in history. The day when the church received the Holy Spirit. You know, it's like those little This Day in History skits on radio and TV. This day in history, so many years ago, something happened. So this day, 2,000 years ago, the Holy Spirit entered into the church for the first time. Except, this isn't just, a day to remember, something special, something fun to think about, something fun to reminisce on. This isn't just about remembering Dean Martin's birthday. It's not just about when Jennifer Lawrence won an Oscar. This is a historical event that absolutely informs who we are as people of God, people called by God to do the Lord's work. This day in history was so long ago that it came even before Paul wrote that letter to the Romans that Allie just read. He spoke in past tense, all right? Past tense about the church receiving the Holy Spirit. He reminded them that they already received the Holy Spirit. And likewise, as we read it, we are reminded that we have already received the Holy Spirit. And much like those Christians at Paul's time in Rome, we need to understand what it means that we have received the Holy Spirit. Paul uses the contrast to help us get this great picture. Slavery versus adoption. Before you had the Spirit, you were slaves. You were just doing what you were told. You were doing whatever you thought would get you ahead in life. You were doing whatever would give you control. You were doing whatever would give you a passing moment of glorification. Slaves, really, with no real place in this world and no real purpose. Slavery to sin. It is a sickness and causes suffering. God cures that sickness by adopting us, saying, you're no longer slaves. I want to adopt you. When you first received the Spirit, you were adopted by God and became part of God's family unit, as Barb was saying in the communion meditation. When we call on God, as we do as a parent, we bear witness about our place in this world. We bear witness about who we belong to. It's quite the opposite of being a slave. Quite the contrast. God didn't buy us at a slave auction. We were adopted. Those people buying and selling slaves, they were the real slaves themselves. They belonged to sin, and sin told them what to do. Things that bring suffering upon fellow human beings. We who call upon our God, who made us, we are not slaves. Whether wealthy or poor, or even if we were actual physical slaves to other people, we would be made free as soon as we're adopted by God. That slavery can no longer bind us, even if we still have to physically do the work. Free in the Spirit. The Spirit has freed our souls. We've been given a family, we've been given a home, and a parent who loves us more than we could ever know. A parent who's not only caring for us now, but building us up quite the savings for us to inherit in the future. As Paul said, if receiving the Spirit frees us from slavery and makes us children in the household of God, then we're also heirs of God's kingdom. We, along with Jesus, will inherit the kingdom. Not just be able to live there, not just be able to enjoy it. It will belong to us. A gift of great, great power and great responsibility. So, two big things to remember about what it means to receive the Holy Spirit, as we find in Paul's passage here. One, we become children of God, just as Jesus is God's child. And two, because of that, we stand to inherit spiritual property and wealth that's far beyond anything of this world. Simple enough, right? Two simple things. Oh, but watch out for that curveball. Right, Ryan? Got to watch out for the curveball. Not all of us can hit a good curveball, and Paul knows how to throw a good curveball. He puts a big if in there. If you see right in the middle of those sentences, Paul's got a big if in there. All this is true, right, if we take our share in Jesus' suffering. If we are willing to put ourselves on the line, whatever the consequences may be. If we're willing to go there with Jesus, to follow him all the way, then we will be glorified with him. The suffering we take on, it comes in all sorts of ways. So you think of Paul in the early church and the early believers in Acts. We see all the suffering, the persecutions, and things that they went through. But suffering comes in all kinds of ways. I think of Bruce Barclay, who suffered through 4 years of cancer. Yet, he fought that cancer and took on that suffering without a second thought, so he could spend every moment with his family. To be there for them, to be there with them, for the sake of love. That is something purely divine. There is no resurrection without the cross. There's just not. And those of us who are willing to suffer alongside Jesus, and however that suffering comes, we will be glorified with Jesus. No, that's a lofty phrase, though, isn't it? Glorified? Glorified with Jesus. I can't say that I totally understand it. At least like I think I do. I look to the Jesus glory passages, like the Transfiguration, or how John of Patmos saw Jesus in his fantastic vision and revelation. Times when Jesus is seen in all his glory and wonder, when Jesus ascended into heaven. And I want to stop real quickly and talk about what you're seeing in the picture. On the left is outside in the courtyard of the Church of the Ascension. So that is in Jerusalem, and it's on the Mount of Olives. So it's on the hill right across from the Jerusalem hill. You go down a valley and then up another hill, and you're into the old city of Jerusalem. So this is right across the valley on the Mount of Olives. And up there is the Church of the Ascension, and this is traditionally the place where Jesus was when he ascended into heaven. And then inside on the right, that is a rock, and it's got a few pieces of wood and an opening in the ground below to expose the rock. And they say that is the rock he was standing on when Jesus was lifted up and ascended into heaven. When Jesus ascended into heaven, even though it doesn't use the word glory in that passage, his disciples, oh man, they were staring in awe at the glorious sight of Jesus going up and disappearing into the sky. Now, if that, or like Jesus in the vision, or Jesus in Transfiguration, if that's what glory looks like, then I guess we've got to picture ourselves as something similar, right? If we're going to be glorified with Jesus, it's just kind of weird to think about. We don't have any real ideas, real pictures of what that looks like, us in glory with Jesus. Can we even picture ourselves like that? Sure, maybe in passing from this life into the next life, and that spiritual movement on to the next phase. But in this life, how can we even picture ourselves being glorified like that? There are no stories of us doing that, being transfigured, resurrected from the dead, ascending into heaven like Jesus did and like Elijah did before him. There's no visions of us appearing on a throne in God's kingdom. Glory. Glory, by definition, it is high renown and honor, magnificence and great beauty is how the dictionary describes glory. Our willingness to struggle and suffer as Jesus did, to share God's love, that shows how great and honorable, magnificent, and beautiful God really is. It's a very powerful way to put God's glory on display for the world. There's not a lot of examples of the church putting God's glory on display the way Jesus did, at the transfiguration, ascension, resurrection, and visions like John. There's not a lot of examples of us doing that, except for Pentecost. God's glory was definitely on display that day. The first day when God's glory was first shining through the church, rushing winds, tongues of fire, speaking in tongues, empowered to give new life to the world, to go forward and do Jesus' work. And what you see in the pictures here is the one on the left. That is the upper room, or is what is traditionally known as the upper room, where the Last Supper was and where the disciples would have been when the Holy Spirit came. And the picture on the right is outside of that, so you can see you actually do have to walk upstairs to get into that room. Today, as we look back on that precious moment in time of Pentecost, we know whenever we are led by the Spirit in doing the Lord's work, God's glory is shining through us. Just as God's glory shone in the Holy Spirit coming down and speaking in tongues and all this magnificent stuff, just as much God's glory was shown as the disciples, and then having become apostles, were doing Jesus' work and giving healing to the world. God's glory was absolutely on display. May we send out our spiritual invites and invite the Holy Spirit this day into our hearts. As children of God and heirs of the kingdom, may God's high renown and honor, magnificence and great beauty, may God's glory shine through each one of us. Amen.